The morning light slipped into the small orphanage room, where the girl sat quietly on her bed, hugging her thin blanket to stay warm. She had grown used to the chill in the air, the creaking wooden floor, and the distant chatter of children waking up in the hallway. But what she could never fully get used to was the feeling of being alone. Her name was Mira, and though people around her cared in their own busy way, she often felt like a leaf drifting in a large river, floating because she had no other choice. Every day at the orphanage followed the same routine. Wake up at dawn, wash up, line up for breakfast, and then spend the rest of the day in a mix of chores, classes, and trying to stay out of trouble. But Mira had something that made her days a little different. She had a secret she protected like a precious treasure, an old, scratched piano sitting in the far corner of the storage room. It wasn't much to look at. The wood was cracked in places, some keys were crooked, and the smell of dust never fully left it. But to Mira, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. She didn't care if the piano sounded uneven or if some notes were louder than others. She didn't care that nobody else believed that instrument still had music left in it. To her, it was a doorway into a world that made sense. Most nights, after everyone had already gone to sleep, Mira would sneak into the storage room. She always stepped carefully so the floorboards wouldn't complain too loudly. Then she would sit down, take a deep breath, and place her fingers lightly on the keys. She didn't always know what she was playing. Many times, the melody came from a memory, a feeling, or simply the need to express what she couldn't say out loud. But there was one tune she always went back to, a simple one, just a few notes repeated in a soft pattern. It was the first song her mother ever taught her. Her mother's face had grown blurry in her memory over the years, but the sound of that tune stayed sharp and clear. Mira remembered sitting on her mother's lap as a small child, watching her slender fingers glide across the keys. She remembered the warmth of that moment, the way her mother whispered, "Listen." The heart always knows how to speak. She hadn't understood it back then, but now the words carried her through every difficult day. The orphanage staff knew Mira liked music, but they didn't really understand how much it meant to her. They were too busy trying to manage everything. There were bills to pay, repairs to make, kids to look after, and not nearly enough help to go round. So Mira's love for the piano became something she kept to herself. She never complained. She never demanded attention. She simply played whenever she could, hoping that somehow the music would fill the empty spaces inside her. One morning, as Mira sat in the dining hall eating her simple breakfast of bread and tea, she overheard two staff members talking near the doorway. Their voices were low, but the room was quiet enough that their words drifted to her table. They found her mother. One whispered. Mira froze, her fingers tightening around her cup. "She's alive," the other replied, sounding shocked. "But she's in bad condition. They say she's in a hospital far from here. No family, no money, nothing." The voices grew faint as the two walked into the hallway. Mira stared down at her breakfast, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Her mother, alive. The thought felt unreal, like hearing about a star you thought had burnt out suddenly shining again. She wanted to run to the staff members and ask 1,000 questions, but fear held her in place. What if she had heard wrong? What if they didn't want her to know? What if knowing changed nothing at all? Later that day, she gathered the courage to approach the caretaker, the one who usually watched over the younger children. The caretaker sighed and admitted the truth. Yes, her mother had been found. Yes, she was alive. But she was weak, struggling with an illness that needed treatment they couldn't afford. Mira listened in silence, feeling as though the ground beneath her had shifted. "We'll try our best to figure out what to do," the caretaker said gently. "But right now, there isn't much we can promise." "I'm sorry, Mira. I know this is hard." The word felt too small for what Mira felt inside. It wasn't just hard, it was crushing. She had lived for years believing her mother was gone forever. She had taught herself not to hope, and now hope had returned, but only to remind her how helpless she really was. That evening, as the other children played outside, Mira slipped into the storage room again. She didn't bother turning on the small lamp this time. She just sat in the dimness and placed her hands on the piano keys. A single note echoed in the quiet room. Trembling like her heart, she played the simple tune again, the one from her childhood, the one that felt like her mother's voice calling from far away. The notes rose and fell softly, like a whisper in an empty hall. Mira closed her eyes and let herself imagine that her mother could hear her, that the music could somehow reach across distance and sickness and time. A tear slid down her cheek, falling onto the piano bench. She brushed it away quickly and kept playing. This tune was all she had. It was the only thing she could offer in a world that demanded so much from her. Just as she finished the last soft note, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Mira quickly wiped her face and sat up straighter. The caretaker stepped into the room, her expression gentle but serious. "Mira," she said softly, "there's something else I didn't tell you earlier, and I think you should know." Mira's heart tightened again. "We received a notice today," the caretaker continued. "A family is interested in fostering a child. They want someone young, quiet, and responsible. And your name came up." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "If they choose you, you may have to move far away, possibly to another town." The piano keys blurred before Mira's eyes as she tried to process the words. Move away. Leave the orphanage. Leave the piano. Leave any chance of seeing her mother again. Do I have a choice?" she whispered. The caretaker hesitated. "Not really. The system will decide. It's for your future. They want what's best for you." What's best? Mira wondered how anyone could know what was best for her when they didn't understand what she was fighting for. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by the small window in her room, watching the moonlight paint the floor in pale silver. She felt trapped between two impossible paths: being taken away from the place closest to her memories, or staying and watching her mother slip further away because she had no way to help. Her chest tightened as she realized something. She needed a miracle. Not a dream, not a wish, a real miracle. Something that could change everything. The next morning, while Mira was sweeping the hallway, she heard excited voices coming from the office. Staff members were talking about some event happening in town. A music competition. A major one. A competition run by a strict, wealthy judge known for never being impressed by anyone. The prize included money. A big amount. Enough to change someone's life. The idea struck Mira like lightning. Her broom slipped from her fingers. A competition. A chance. A way to help her mother. She didn't know how she would convince the caretaker. She didn't know if she would even be allowed to enter. She didn't know if she could win. But she knew this. Doing nothing would never save her mother. And so, for the first time in a long while, Mira felt something spark inside her, a quiet, trembling determination. If there was even the smallest chance her music could help, she had to take it. Because sometimes a simple tune isn't simple at all. Sometimes it's the only hope a heart has left. The sun was still low in the sky when Mira stepped outside the orphanage the next morning, carrying a bucket of water meant for the garden plants. She walked slowly, her thoughts swirling with the same idea that had been keeping her awake all night: the competition. It felt like a tiny flame inside her, flickering but refusing to go out. She didn't know how she would make it happen, but for the first time in a long while, hope had taken a small step forward. As she poured water near the row of small plants, she heard voices behind her. Two older girls were talking excitedly near the wall. "Did you hear? The big music event is coming soon," one said. "Of course I heard. Everyone's going. They say the judge is some rich man who never smiles," the other giggled. "And only serious musicians stand a chance. People with training, not beginners." Mira lowered her gaze. She knew she wasn't trained like others. She didn't have a teacher, or lessons, or a perfect piano. She had only her feelings and the old tune her mother had once taught her. But something inside her whispered that it had to be enough. It simply had to. Later that day, Mira found a moment to approach the caretaker again. The caretaker was sorting papers in the office, her glasses slipping down her nose as usual. "Can I talk to you?" Mira asked, her voice unsure. The caretaker looked up. "Of course. What is it?" Mira hesitated. Her hands felt cold. I want to join the music competition in town." The caretaker blinked in surprise, as if the idea had never occurred to her. "You, Mira, that event is very big. It's not like the small talent shows we hold here. It's filled with trained students and performers. And the fee to enter." Mira swallowed hard. "I know I don't have training, but I can still play. And if I try, maybe I can win. The prize money could help my mother. I just want a chance." The room fell quiet. The caretaker's expression softened, but her eyebrows drew together with worry. "Mira," she began gently, "I understand why you want this. Truly, I do. But even if we wanted to register you, we barely have the funds to cover our monthly needs. And the judges won't go easy on you. They expect excellence. I don't want to see you hurt or disappointed." Mira's throat tightened. "Please, I don't need anything fancy. I just need to try." The caretaker sighed, as though she were weighing something heavy in her mind. After a long moment, she said, "Let me think about it. I can't promise anything. but I'll see what we can do." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either, and that was enough to give Mira a small spark of hope. That night, she returned to the storage room, her heart full of nerves and determination. The piano keys looked pale in the dim light, touched by shadows from the small window above. She sat down on the old bench and closed her eyes. Maybe she didn't have training like others. Maybe she didn't have fancy clothes or perfect confidence. But she had something else, something that couldn't be taught. Her mother's melody. She began to play the simple tune softly, letting each note settle gently into the room. Then, slowly, she added small variations, tiny ripples of sound she created based on how she felt. She imagined her mother listening. She imagined the judge listening. She imagined a world where the music she played could change something real. Hours passed without her noticing. She only realized the time when her fingers started to ache. But even then, she didn't want to stop. She needed this. She needed something to hold on to. The next morning, she dragged herself through breakfast, tired but hopeful. The caretaker approached her and gently tapped her shoulder. "Come to the office after you finish eating," she said. Mira nodded quickly, barely swallowing the last bite before heading to the office. Her heartbeat was loud, like a drum being played inside her chest. The caretaker sat behind her desk, hands folded. She looked at Mira with a mixture of warmth and caution. "I spoke to the director," she said at last, "and we've decided to let you enter." Mira gasped quietly, her hands flying to her mouth. However, the caretaker added, "We can't pay the entry fee. We don't have the funds. But the good news is that the event is accepting volunteers to help with setup and cleaning. If you agree to work for them for 2 days, they will waive the fee." Mira felt the world brighten. "I'll do it. I'll work all week if I have to." The caretaker smiled gently. "You only need 2 days. But listen carefully, this doesn't guarantee anything. The competition will be tough. I don't want you to feel crushed if the outcome isn't what you hope for." Mira nodded. She understood the warning, but deep inside, she was already imagining herself on stage. She knew it would be hard. She knew others would be better prepared. But she also knew she had to take this chance. The next 2 days passed quickly. Mira worked long hours at the event hall, sweeping floors, carrying boxes, setting up rows of chairs, and helping staff place decorations along the stage. She didn't complain once. Every small task felt like a step closer to her dream. She watched the stage from up close, studying how the lights shined, how the sound system hummed, and how the piano sat perfectly polished in the center. It was bigger and newer than anything she had ever played. The keys looked like they belonged to another world. During breaks, she would sit quietly in the back row, imagining her fingers touching those keys. She imagined the sound filling the hall, imagined the judge looking up, surprised by her melody. On the evening of the second day, as she carried a box filled with sheet music to a back room, she overheard 2 event staff members talking. "I heard the judge arrived early," one said. "Yeah, and he's in a bad mood today. They say he's strict because he was once a talented musician himself, lost everything, so now he expects perfection from everyone else. No wonder people fear performing in front of him. He barely claps for anyone." Mira felt her stomach twist. A judge like that would never be impressed by someone like her, someone with no training, no teacher, and no fancy music piece. Still, she didn't let herself back down. She'd already come this far. That night, when she returned to the orphanage, she went straight to the storage room again. Her fingers trembled as she placed them on the keys. She wasn't scared of the competition. She was scared of failing her mother. She began playing the melody. But this time, she didn't stop at the simple tune. She let her emotions guide her, letting the sadness, hope, fear, and love flow through her fingers. The music grew stronger, deeper, fuller. The tiny room around her seemed to disappear. She didn't even notice the caretaker standing quietly by the doorway, watching her with a soft, surprised expression. The next morning was the day of the competition. Mira woke before the sun, her heart fluttering like a small bird inside her chest. She wore her cleanest dress, simple, faded, but neat. She tried to smooth out the wrinkles with her hands, wishing she had something nicer, but reminding herself that music mattered more than clothes. On the way to the event hall, the caretaker walked beside her. She didn't say much, but her presence brought quiet comfort. When they reached the hall, a wave of nervous energy filled the air. Contestants hurried in and out of rooms, carrying sheet music, talking to teachers, warming up their hands or adjusting their outfits. Most wore beautiful clothes, looked confident, and had people cheering them on. Mira felt tiny among them, like a quiet shadow blending into the floor. A girl around her age passed by, dressed in a bright outfit. She glanced at Mira and whispered to her friend, "She doesn't look like she belongs here." Mira's cheeks warmed, but she kept her head down. She wasn't here for applause. She was here for a chance. When her name was finally called for registration, she stepped forward with trembling hands. The assistant at the table looked at her up and down. Surprised. "Name?" the assistant asked. Mira spoke softly but clearly. "All right," the assistant said, marking her name on the list. "You'll be in the second group. Wait near the stage, and good luck." Her voice softened at the end, as if she sensed Mira's nerves. Mira nodded and walked toward the backstage area. Her heart thumped wildly, but her steps were steady. She kept repeating one thought in her mind: "For my mother, for my mother, for my mother." She sat on a small chair backstage, listening to the sounds of other performers warming up. Fast notes, complicated runs, sharp rhythm sounds she had never learned to make. Her hands felt cold now, resting in her lap. The caretaker appeared briefly, placing a gentle hand on Mira's shoulder. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "you'll be okay. Just play from your heart. That's all anyone can ask." Mira nodded slowly. She wasn't ready, but she was willing. And sometimes, that was enough to take the first step onto a stage that could change everything. Mira sat backstage, her hands pressed together tightly as she tried to calm the shaking in her fingers. The sounds of the competition floated through the curtains, bright melodies, fast runs, confident performers showing everything they had practiced for years. Each performance brought a burst of applause from the audience. Mira listened to them with a mix of awe and fear. She had never played in front of so many people. She had never played on a real stage, and she had never played on a piano as grand and polished as the one waiting at the center of the hall. It felt like stepping into a dream she wasn't sure she deserved to be part of. A volunteer walked by and called out the names of the next performers. Mira's heart jumped every time she heard a name that sounded close to hers. She tried to breathe slowly, but her breaths felt too short and too tight. She glanced at the stage through the small gap between the curtains. A boy around her age was performing, his hands dancing across the keys with perfect precision. His teacher stood proudly at the side, nodding in rhythm with the music. The judge watched with a serious expression, unreadable. Everyone in the audience seemed so focused, so sure of what real talent should look like. Mira looked down at her own hands. They weren't steady or trained. They held no certificates or fancy lessons. All she had was a tune from her mother, a tune filled with memory and pain and warmth. Maybe that's not enough, she thought. But then she remembered her mother lying sick, alone in a hospital room, waiting for help that might never come. The image of her mother's tired smile pushed away Mira's fear. Even if only for a moment, she needed to try. Even if she failed, she needed to know she had tried. Just then, the caretaker hurried backstage. She wasn't allowed to be there long, but she leaned close to Mira and whispered, "Don't look at the crowd. Don't worry about anyone else. Just play the way you always do in the storage room. Play with your heart. That's what makes you special." Mira nodded slowly. The caretaker squeezed her hand gently and then stepped back, giving her a small, encouraging smile before leaving. A few minutes later, a volunteer lifted a clipboard and called out, "Mira, you're next. Please get ready." Mira stood up too quickly, almost losing her balance. Her legs felt stiff, like they didn't want to move. She forced herself forward anyway, each step feeling like she was walking into a storm. As she reached the edge of the stage, she could hear the audience clapping politely for the previous performer. Her heart raced even faster. The volunteer guided her to stand behind the curtain. "When the applause stops, walk out and take your seat at the piano," the volunteer instructed softly. Mira nodded. Even though her mind felt far away, the applause faded. The stage fell silent. The volunteer gave a small gesture. Go. Mira stepped onto the stage. The lights felt warm on her face. The hall looked enormous from where she stood, rows and rows of people, all staring forward, waiting to hear what she would play. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears. She walked to the piano slowly, trying not to let her knees wobble too much. The piano looked even larger up close, its smooth black surface shining under the lights. She sat down on the bench carefully and adjusted her position, just like she had practiced in the storage room. Her hands hovered above the keys. She didn't look at the judge. She didn't look at the audience. She closed her eyes and thought of her mother. She pressed the first note. The sound was clear, warm, and full, so different from the uneven tone of the old piano at the orphanage. The beauty of it surprised her, but she didn't let it stop her. She began playing the simple tune slowly, letting each note sink into the quiet hall. At first, she felt the weight of every person watching her. She imagined them thinking she was too simple, too plain, too inexperienced. Her fingers trembled. Then she took a quiet breath and remembered the words her mother once whispered to her. Listen. The heart always knows how to speak. Mira let the memory guide her. Her hands began to move with more confidence. She played the tune the way she played it alone in the storage room, soft, gentle, almost like a whisper. The hall stayed quiet, not a single cough or shuffle. The silence wrapped around her like a warm blanket. After the simple melody, she hesitated for a second. Then she shifted into the variations she practiced the night before. She added small waves of sound, letting the notes rise and fall like emotions she had kept inside for years. It wasn't perfect. A few notes were softer than she meant them to be. Her hands tensed once or twice. But the music had something else, something fragile and honest that made the air in the hall feel still. The judge, who had barely smiled for anyone that day, slowly leaned forward without realizing it. There was something in her playing that pulled at him. Something familiar. As Mira continued, her fear slowly melted away. She wasn't thinking about winning or losing anymore. She wasn't thinking about the audience's reaction. She was thinking of her mother, of nights alone in the storage room, of hope and sadness and longing. Her music carried all of it. When she finally played the last note, the hall remained completely silent for a moment. Mira opened her eyes slowly. She didn't know what this silence meant. Was it good? Was it bad? Then, like a soft wave, claps began to rise from the audience. It started with a few gentle applauses, then grew louder and fuller. People weren't cheering wildly, but they were clapping sincerely, warmly, with a kind of respect that made Mira's eyes sting. Mira stood up shakily and bowed. She tried not to cry. She didn't know if she impressed anyone. She didn't know if she had any chance of winning, but she had played the best she could. She walked backstage slowly, her legs still trembling. The moment she stepped behind the curtain, she let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. Some of the volunteers who had watched her from backstage smiled gently at her. One of them said, "That was really beautiful. Well done." Hearing those words made Mira's chest warm. But just as she started to feel a tiny bit proud, she overheard a group of contestants laughing quietly nearby. She played a lullaby. One girl whispered, "Yeah, that was so simple." Another said, "Cute, but it won't win anything." Their giggles stung Mira like tiny needles. She lowered her gaze again. Maybe they were right. Maybe her simple music wasn't enough. Maybe her heart wasn't strong enough to compete against years of training. A small tear escaped, but she wiped it away quickly before anyone could see. The caretaker found her a few minutes later and hugged her gently. "You did wonderful," she said softly. "You should be proud of yourself." Mira nodded, though her heart felt heavy. She didn't want to disappoint the caretaker. She didn't want to disappoint her mother. After all the performances ended, everyone was asked to return to the hall for the announcement of the finalists. Mira walked slowly with the others, her head down, her hands clasped tightly together. She didn't expect anything. She didn't want to hope too much. But when the names of the finalists were called, something unexpected happened. The announcer read out the first few names, talented students from big music schools. Mira listened quietly. Then the announcer said, "And the final name." Mira froze. She looked up sharply, wondering if she had heard wrong. The caretaker gasped beside her. Some contestants turned to look at Mira with shock. A few even frowned. But Mira didn't care. Her heart suddenly felt light. Almost floating. She had been chosen. She had a chance. She covered her mouth with both hands as tears filled her eyes, not from fear, not from sadness, but from a deep, overwhelming relief. She wasn't invisible. Her music had reached someone. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of her miracle. The moment she stepped out of the car, her legs felt unsteady, as if the ground itself was too soft to trust. She had seen big buildings before, but nothing like this tall glass place that seemed to rise straight into the sky. The evening sun reflected off the windows, making the entire entrance glow in soft gold. People were already lining up, some carrying instruments, others practicing in quiet corners. She held her small bag close to her chest, the one that carried her music sheets even though she rarely needed them. She kept thinking about her mother and the message she had left earlier. Her mother's voice had been weak, but she still tried to sound encouraging. She had told her not to worry, to simply do her best, and that everything would be fine. But the girl knew things were not fine. She knew how badly her mother needed treatment and how the bills were beginning to pile up. And she also knew this performance was the only chance they had left. As she walked into the large lobby, she felt herself shrinking among the crowd. The lights above were bright, the floors so polished she could almost see her reflection. She tightened her grip on her bag and glanced around, hoping to find a quiet corner to breathe. That's when she saw a woman sitting near the wall, holding a flute case. The woman noticed her looking nervous. "You here to perform too?" the woman asked kindly. She nodded. "Don't worry. Everyone's scared the first time," the woman added with a small smile. The girl tried to smile back, but her throat felt tight. She didn't want to explain how her performance wasn't just about nerves, but about survival. Before she could respond, a staff member with a clipboard called her name. She quickly walked over. "You're number 17, the staff member said. "You'll wait in the second hall. Please follow the sign." She nodded again and followed the arrow. The hallway was long, and she could hear faint music coming from different directions, someone practicing violin scales, someone else warming up their voice. Every sound reminded her that others had prepared for this all their lives, with teachers and classes and expensive instruments. She had none of that. She had learned from an old piano in the orphanage and from kind strangers who taught her a little. Whenever they passed by, when she reached the waiting hall, she found rows of chairs placed against the walls. Many performers were already seated, each lost in their own world. Some tapped their feet nervously, some whispered to themselves, and others just closed their eyes. She sat quietly in the last row, folded her hands, and tried to calm her breathing. She remembered the small piano in the orphanage, the one that always had a slightly broken key. She remembered how she would play simple tunes at night, hoping the sound would fill the emptiness she felt. She remembered how the other children sometimes laughed at her because she played so much. But she didn't care. The piano was the only thing that understood her. And then she remembered the night she was taken to see her mother for the first time. She remembered how surprised she had been to learn she even had a mother at all. The hospital lights, the quiet room, the weak smile on her mother's face, all of it stayed with her. From that moment, she played not for herself, but for her mother. Her eyes stung a little as she sat waiting. She rubbed her hands together, feeling the light tremble in her fingers. She tried to imagine her mother sitting beside her, whispering that she believed in her. Suddenly, a loud cheer echoed from the stage area, followed by applause. That meant someone had just finished performing. The staff member's voice followed soon after. "Number 16, please step forward." Her heart started beating faster. That meant she was next. She stood up and took a slow breath. She had performed many times in front of small groups, but nothing like this. This wasn't just a crowd. This was a competition filled with important people, including the millionaire judge who was known for being strict and impossible to impress. She walked toward the doorway where another staff member waited. "Are you ready?" the staff member asked. She wasn't, not at all, but she nodded anyway. "You'll go on stage once the host calls your number. Stay here until then." The girl looked through the gap in the curtain. The stage was huge. The lights made everything look unreal. Rows and rows of seats were filled with people, murmuring quietly or watching the performers with curious expressions. She could see the judge's table near the front, long and bright under the stage lights. And there he was, the millionaire judge. He sat with his hands folded, his expression unreadable. She had seen him on TV, heard how his words could change someone's life with a single comment. Some people feared him, others admired him. She didn't know what to think. All she knew was that he held the power to decide her future. Another performer finished. Another round of applause. Then she heard her number, number 17. "Please welcome our next participant," the host called out with an enthusiastic voice. Her heart jumped. She looked at the staff member, who gave her a small nod. She stepped forward, pushing the curtain aside. The moment she stepped into the light, it felt like the world had gone silent. The audience stared at her. Some looked curious, others unsure. She felt tiny standing in the middle of the wide stage. She walked toward the piano at the center. It was a beautiful grand piano, polished so well that she could see the lights reflected on its black surface. She placed her small bag down and took a deep breath. But as she sat on the bench, she realized something. She didn't have her mother's lucky ribbon. She always kept it in her pocket, but it wasn't there. She felt a sudden wave of panic. She didn't know if she could play without it. She checked her pockets again slowly, carefully, but it wasn't there. Her throat tightened. Her fingers felt cold. She looked down at the keys, the white and black lined up neatly, waiting for her touch. Then she closed her eyes. She pictured her mother's smile. She imagined the warmth of her voice. She imagined her saying, "You don't need anything else. You have your heart. And that was enough. She placed her hands on the keys. The hall was silent. She began to play. The first notes were soft, almost trembling. But as she continued, her hands grew steadier. The melody flowed gently at first, like a quiet river. She let her feelings guide her, not the fear. The audience leaned forward, surprised by the softness and honesty in the sound. The millionaire judge's expression changed slightly. He tilted his head, studying her with a look that wasn't cold anymore. She kept playing, building the melody bit by bit. The simplicity of the tune didn't matter. What mattered was the emotion. She put everything she felt into the keys, her mother's pain, her own hope, the struggle, the fear, the love. It all melted into the music. The hall grew so quiet that even her softest notes seemed loud. People watched her in silence. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She forgot the crowd, the judges, the shining lights. She was back at the hospital, sitting next to her mother, holding her hand. She played as if the music itself could reach her mother's heart. As the piece neared its last section, she felt her eyes filling with tears. Her hands trembled, but she didn't stop. Instead, she allowed the emotion to shape the final notes. She pressed the last key. The sound lingered, soft and gentle, before fading into the silent hall. For a moment, no one moved. No one even breathed. Then a single clap, then another. And suddenly the entire hall erupted into applause. People stood, clapping, cheering, some even wiping their eyes. The girl blinked, not quite understanding what was happening. She slowly looked at the judges. The millionaire judge's eyes looked different, softer, as if he saw something he hadn't expected. He leaned toward his microphone and, with a voice that carried through the entire hall, he said, "That was remarkable." Her heart jumped. She didn't know what it meant for her future yet, but she knew this was the moment everything began to change. She remained seated at the piano for a few seconds, unsure if she should stand or stay where she was. The applause continued, rolling across the hall like a warm wave. She felt as if the world around her had slowed down, softening into something unreal. Her heart raced, her hands trembled, and her eyes glistened under the bright lights. When she finally stood up from the bench, she lowered her head politely, unsure how to react to so many people cheering just for her. She had never imagined such a moment. All her life, she had been overlooked or ignored. Yet here she was, standing on a stage in front of hundreds of people, and they were cheering for her. The host stepped forward with a smile, gesturing for the audience to calm down. Though the applause softened, it didn't stop entirely. "That was absolutely beautiful," the host said warmly. "Let's hear from our judges." She turned her gaze to the judges' table, nervous all over again. The millionaire judge leaned closer to his microphone, studying her in a way that made her feel seen, not judged. "Young lady," he began, his voice steady and calm, "your performance wasn't just music. It was emotion. It was honesty. It was the kind of sincerity that can't be taught in any school or learned from any teacher. It comes from life. And you shared that with us tonight." She wasn't sure how to respond. Her throat tightened. She simply nodded, hoping he would understand that she was grateful. The judge continued, "I've heard thousands of performances. Many were flawless. Many were impressive. But very few felt the way yours did. It touched something real. You have a gift." A soft gasp ran through the audience. She felt her eyes burning again, but she blinked quickly to hold back the tears. Another judge praised her as well, speaking about her natural expression and how she played from the heart. The third judge called her performance unexpected and breathtaking. Each word felt unreal. She had prepared herself for disappointment, for criticism, for the possibility that she wasn't good enough. Yet here they were praising her. After a moment, the host stepped forward again. "Thank you, judges. Number 17, you may head backstage now." She nodded gently and walked off the stage, still overwhelmed. The moment she stepped behind the curtain, the noise of the audience softened, replaced by murmurs from the waiting area. Performers waiting for their turn looked at her with wide eyes. Some seemed surprised, others quietly impressed. One girl whispered to her friend, "Did you hear her? She played like a professional." Another person said, "I didn't expect that from someone so quiet." She felt shy under their attention. She kept walking, heading to the small chair she had been sitting on earlier. She sat down slowly, letting out a long breath. Her hands still trembled slightly. But this time it wasn't from fear, it was from something closer to hope. She thought of her mother. She wished her mother could have been there to hear the applause. She wished she could have seen how people reacted to the music. But she knew her mother was still in the hospital, waiting. She wanted to call her right away. But the competition wasn't over yet. She needed to stay until the end. After a while, a staff member approached her. "The judges would like to speak with you privately when the event ends," he said. Her heart jumped. "Is something wrong?" she asked softly. The staff member gave a friendly smile. "No, not at all. It's a good thing," she nodded, though she still felt nervous about what they wanted to discuss. The rest of the event continued, but she hardly heard the music or the announcements. Her mind kept drifting back to that moment on stage. The way the hall had gone silent, the way the applause rose like a sudden burst of light. Finally, the host stepped forward again. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight. After careful discussion, the judges have selected the top performers." Everyone leaned forward. "Tonight's highest honor goes to number 17. For a few seconds, she didn't react. She wasn't sure if she had heard correctly. The crowd burst into applause again. People looked at her with admiration, some even placing a hand on her shoulder as if sharing her victory. She stood slowly, unsure where to go. A staff member guided her to the stage again, where the host handed her a small trophy and an envelope. The trophy sparkled under the lights, but she could only stare at the envelope. "This is for you," the host said warmly. She held it tightly, knowing it contained a prize that could change everything. When the applause finally settled, the judges left their table and walked to the backstage area. The millionaire judge was the first to reach her. "Can we speak for a moment?" he asked gently. She nodded, still holding her envelope. He led her to a quiet corner where the noise of the crowd faded. His expression wasn't stern or strict, it was kind. "I want to ask you something," he began. "Who taught you to play like that?" She hesitated, then said, "No one, really. I just learned a little on my own." He raised his brows, surprised. "You're telling me you have no formal training?" She shook her head quietly. He let out a slow breath, as if trying to understand how that was even possible. "Do you know what you have?" he asked softly. "You have something rare, something that can't be taught. You have a voice in your music, a story, and people feel it." She didn't know what to say. The judge continued, "I want to help you, but first, I need to understand why someone with your talent hasn't been trained." She stared at the floor for a moment before answering. "I didn't have anyone to help me. I grew up in an orphanage, and now my mother's sick. I'm trying to help her." The judge's expression softened even more. "Your mother's sick." She nodded. Double quotes. "Is that why you entered the competition?" he asked. Double quotes. "Yes. I need the prize money." The judge remained silent for a moment, then gently said, "Let me see that envelope." She hesitated, but handed it to him. He opened it, pulled out the check, and read the amount. Then he looked at her. "Is this enough for your mother's treatment?" She shook her head. The judge folded the check back into the envelope and returned it to her. "Come with me," he said. She followed him out of the backstage area and into a quieter hallway. He took out his phone and made a short call. She couldn't hear everything he said, but she heard words like hospital care and cover all expenses. When he hung up, he turned to her. "Your mother's treatment will be handled. Don't worry about the cost anymore." Her breath caught. "What? But why?" He smiled gently. "Because sometimes, someone just needs a chance. Tonight, you showed us something beautiful. The least I can do is help you keep the person who inspires you." Her tears finally fell. She covered her mouth, trying not to cry too loudly. The judge placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "And one more thing," he said. "When your mother gets better, I want you to go to a real music school. I'll make the arrangements. Your talent shouldn't stay hidden." She couldn't speak. She simply nodded with all the strength she had. Later that night, she rushed to the hospital. When she entered her mother's room, her mother looked surprised. "You're back early," her mother whispered. The girl burst into tears and hugged her. "Everything's going to be okay," she whispered. "Your treatment's going to start soon. You're going to get better." Her mother gently stroked her hair. "How?" The girl pulled back just enough to smile. "Music helped us, and for the first time in a long while, hope filled the room like warm sunlight."